paid by the question, so please don't get embarrassed. Well, I have to give you a little history, but I was born and raised in Lithuania in, I guess, a small town. It was the 5th largest city with population of 15,000. Total population of Lithuania before the war was about 2.5 million people, and the Jewish population was about 250,000. You know, why am I here? So I have to first explain to you that when the war started, when Germany attacked Poland, Germany and Russia split Poland among themselves, and Lithuania had a Russian border. So it didn't take long. The Russians came in, and everybody, of course, voted 97% that they want to join Russia, just like it's happening now. So we were under Russian rule before the real war started. The Russians came in, they have, well, they outlawed religion, there were many changes. Most significant was that they confiscated all private business. So my father's business was nationalized, and he had no job. My brother and sister were in Kovno, that was then the capital of Lithuania, at university. It was, by the way, I think the only university in the country. So he went to Kovno and he found a job, and he moved in with my brother and sister. They had an apartment there. My mother and I stayed behind. It didn't take long. They moved in a Russian captain with his family into our house, and they left us one room. So it was time to leave. So my mother and I joined the rest of our family in Kovno. Now, if it wasn't for our move, I wouldn't be here to tell you, because when the Germans came in, within the first, I think, almost first month, every Jewish person in our town, about 4,500 people, I think, were killed. Some of my immediate family, my aunt and cousins. So by sheer, call it luck, we survived so far. We're in Kovno. When the Germans attacked, when the war really started, the Germans attacked Russia. I was in summer camp, about 2 miles from the from the German border. So, you know, I always like to be first. So guess what? I'm the very first prisoner. In fact, I tried to organize a bunch of kids. I figured, let's walk along the Baltic Sea, go north, maybe we'll escape the Germans. Of course, but after an hour or so, there were Germans up north and there were Lithuanians. The Lithuanians didn't like the Russians very much, I guess. So many of them were partisans. They were even given arms by Germany, and they took us back to the camp. And by the way, June 22nd is when the war started. And a few days, they took all the Gentile kids and sent them home. Jewish kids were kept there. It's one area where I have absolutely no recollection what happened there, but by kind of putting a timeline, we were there at least for a month. And one thing I do remember, there was one boy, maybe about 10 years old, and I can, you know, as I said, I can't remember anything. I can see his face now. He was talking back to the Lithuanian guards, so they shot him. So the first time I saw a person being killed. Finally, the Red Cross managed to take all the Jewish kids and sent us home. So I got home, I would say, maybe around August 1st or so. So we were there for, I said, almost a little over a month. When I came home, the first thing, of course, I was marched into the bathroom and have to take a bath and stuff. I remember my brother said I was very quiet, I wouldn't talk, which was unusual for me. And I found out then that already there was an edict that all Jews had to move into an area where they fenced off for a ghetto by August 15th. So there's my chronology. I said I came home maybe 2 weeks before we had to move into the ghetto. I understand there were a lot of killing on the street. The Lithuanians were just, they'd go into a Jewish home, chase the people out, and take over. When we finally moved into the ghetto, it was kind of a slum area where they fenced it off and had, guard towers, and the ghetto was sealed on August 15th. I think there was about 25,000 people in the ghetto. It was so crowded that if you're lucky, one family had a room. As soon as the ghetto was closed, they took, I think it was about 1,200 or 1,500 men every day, took them out to work. They were building an airport or something. And most men, went there. So it didn't, again, the Germans had a system. At the first week that the ghetto opened, they put up a notice that they needed 500 clerical educated people for special clerical work. So everybody rushed trying to sign up for it. It beats working at the airport. Well, by the way, my brother was 12 years older than I was. So my brother and my father decided to go and sign up for it. And my mother wouldn't let him leave. She wanted to make him a sandwich in case they get stuck all day. When they got there, there were 510 people, I think, already surrounded by guards, and everybody else was told, we have the people we need, everybody go back. Then they took them outside the ghetto, we heard machine gun fire, and they killed them all. I guess this was their way to cut off the head of people that could be in leadership. The ghetto had a hospital, and my sister was a medical student before the war, so she volunteered there and worked as a nurse. And one morning she was late, and the hospital was surrounded by Lithuanian guards. Lithuanians were mostly, inside and outside the ghetto. And she pleaded with them to let her in. They wouldn't let her in. And then they set fire to the hospital and burned all the doctors, patients, and nurses. These are all, here's another event. So far, our family was whole. In October, we were told that everybody had to assemble. There was a square in the ghetto, and the guards went from house to house. People that were hiding, they would either shoot them or chase them out. We stood there all day, and as I said, by then there was about 25,000 people maybe. And we were lined up in rows of 10 or 12, I don't remember. And as the line kept moving up, at the front of the line was a German officer that stood there and just would point to people, to tell them to go to the right, to the left. Not that we had a choice, and we didn't know which side is which. It took all day. By the end of the day, I do remember the left side of the line. They had a little over 10,000 people, surrounded them with guards, and marched them out of the ghetto. And we heard machine gun fire for days, and they were all killed. There happened to be forts, abandoned forts from the First World War that the Russians built. And that's where they set up at one of the forts where they were doing all the killing. I can't tell you what the forts were like, or I wouldn't be here to tell you that. Actually, that's where they used, all this killing. In fact, they brought people from other places. I remember one time we were told that 2,000 German Jews are coming, and we saw them. They were still all, dressed decently with their suitcases, except they marched them past the ghetto and to the fort, and they were all killed. While they had, in addition to the people that worked at the airport, they started a lot of small groups to work at various German installations. So there were some groups of 10 or 20, 50, whatever, and every day they would be marched out with the guard, taken to work. I guess some advantage was, if you had anything, you could trade it for food. And by the way, once we moved into the ghetto, we had to turn in all, musical instruments, watches. I mean, there's all kinds of things, that they took away right away. That's when my musical career ended. They took my violin. As I said, I was almost 13 when the war started. And so I was in the ghetto, with friends. We used to get outside, once in a while they'd come and raid. They came in, and one time they kind of gathered up about 200 elderly, 2,000. I got to look at my notes here. Just took them out off the street, elderly and children, and took them out and killed them. As I said, I was kind of a bossy kid. So maybe, don't remember, but maybe after 2 years, we were in the ghetto, by the way, about 3 years. After 2 years, I decided maybe I can join one of the groups outside, so I could get some food. And so there was a group there with auto mechanics that were working at the bus station. So I told them I was auto mechanic, and they accepted me. And there was a small group, I think it was about 15 mechanics. And as we were getting closer, we had one guard to their bus station, I realized I don't even know how to pick up the hood or know what's under it, I was getting a little nervous. But I got lucky again. They put me to work in the stock room. So all I had to do is get the parts for the mechanics. It was very easy work. And by the way, I guess not only Germany, but all Europe, the post office, usually trains and buses were all part of the post office. So there we had maybe about maybe no more than 10 or so Germans from the post office department that ran the bus station. And I don't remember any of them ever, abusing us or anything. They were pretty decent people. We did have, however, as I said, I worked in the stockroom. There was one little problem. The German running the stockroom was stealing tires. And he would make me roll the tires outside the bus station, deliver to his customers. And we all had to wear a yellow star on the front and the back. So, not that I had a choice, but if I was caught, again, that would be the end of my story. As the Russians were approaching when the war started, turning against them, they, at the 7th Fort that I told you where they did all the killing, they took, I think, about 50 or 80 men from the ghetto, took them there, and they exhumed all the bodies. By then, they exhumed 80,000 bodies, and they were burning them. And the ghetto was pretty close to the fort there. We could smell burning flesh. And I don't know why they tried to destroy the evidence. Germany has all open books of information on everything. As the Russians were approaching even closer, they notified us that we were being sent to Germany to work at a new camp, and how nice things will be better. And by the way, by then there was only 5,000 of us left in the ghetto. They marched us to a rail siding, and we had to, they crammed us into cattle cars. I don't know how many of you were in Whitwell and saw that rail car. In fact, I was there just recently, and I couldn't believe how I managed to get into it because it's so high. We didn't have a ramp or anything, but we were crammed in about 100 people, standing room only, in these cars. And they shut the doors, and all we had, they had a bucket of water and a bucket for sanitation. You can imagine what that rail car looked like after a few days. We traveled probably, the trains were moving and stopping, and probably 2-3 days sealed in the rail cars. And we had some people that died during the time we were there. The train pulled into a station in Prussia, really was, and we noticed the sign on the station. It said Stutthof. I don't think any of us had any idea what the town meant. They opened the doors, and they said, hey, all the men had to get off the train. And they said, the ladies, the women are being taken to the new camp. You're going to have wonderful conditions, and the men have to be processed, and you'll meet up later. I remember my mother started crying, and wise guy that I was, I said, what are you worried about? I'll see you. Never saw her again. What happened, that camp turned out to be one of the worst. It was both an extermination camp and a labor camp. So all women with children, elderly, were taken straight to the gas chambers. My brother's wife and child were killed there. My mother and my sister were assigned to the work camp. My sister would never talk about it. I mean nothing. I know what the camp was like when I spoke to other people that survived, but they just had them carry rocks up the hills and down the hills. And my mother was diagnosed maybe a year before the ghetto closed with uterine cancer. And there was no medical help or anything. My sister even got permission to take my mother to one of her professors at the medical school, but Jews were not allowed to be treated by doctors, so there was no help, no medicine. And I remember my mother really suffered. How she carried my mother during the time, I don't know. But they finally, in January of 44, I'm sorry. No, 45. Anyway, they were liberated, and the Russians sent them back to Lithuania. And my mother died, I think, a month after that. So the only consolation I guess we have there is that she wasn't in a mass grave. Our train, we got on another train, and again was 2-3 days and nights that we traveled, and we got off Pais, and they marched us. They told us this is a new camp, and it was several sub-camps of Dachau. They were building an underground factory, and they had about 3 or 4 camps all around where the laborers were there. But first thing they did is shaved our heads. We had to strip. They wouldn't even let you keep a picture or anything. And we were gotten a striped jacket, pants, and wooden clogs. And we had our number on the side of the uniform. When we got to this new camp, there were a lot of boys, young boys, because all the men had to get off the train. So we had to assemble every morning. And within the week, they took all the small boys and gathered them up and sent them, I think it was Auschwitz where they were killed. I was the littlest kid in my age group, just short. I stood on my tiptoes and a couple men were in front of me. Somehow they didn't take me, so I remained in the camp. We worked 12-hour days, 2 weeks days and 2 weeks nights, no breaks. And I think we probably had at least a half hour or more march from the camp to the exact work area. And our rations were a piece of bread, I would say about this size, about a little square. In the morning, we got a ladle of watery brown water. They called it coffee. We didn't get any food during the day. When we came back to the camp after work, we got our rations. And I said our ration was this piece of bread and a bowl of watery soup, sometimes a piece of vegetable or something would float into it. So it didn't take long, maybe, again, I don't know the time, people started dying. We had an average of about 20, 30 a day that just died of starvation. Mm-hmm. And we could almost tell the people that have given up, they're like zombies walking around. You knew they're going to be dead in a couple of days. They asked if there was a dentist among the prisoners, and there was one. his job was to pull the gold teeth from the corpses. Then they would take the corpses outside and dump them in the ditch or whatever they had. So quite often they would replace with new prisoners. And it's interesting, I just read something the other day, reminded me of it. Hungary, I think it was only a year before the war ended when Germany occupied Hungary. And I remember they brought a bunch of young men, Hungarian soldiers, still in their uniforms. And obviously they weren't starved already like we were. And I remember every day they try to go and bathe and stuff. They all died within a month. The shock of the change in diet. So it was really very sad to see. Now, as we were working, again I got lucky. We were assigned, my father and myself, we were assigned to an area where there was a pumping station. This was the gigantic undertaking. They were building an underground factory. So they had moved dirt like a large mountain, then they laid iron and pumped the concrete and made the shell, then they would empty the dirt and continue that. So I was assigned to the mixing station. And every batch was like a rail car of gravel and in cement, and they would pump that concrete right wherever it had to be. So again, the German foreman of the construction company of that section had me clean his hut and run some errands. Some days I had to work, but it was a little easier. In fact, I asked him if he would let my father work inside. There were only a couple inside jobs. But I remember, for some reason, all the German guards and the workers, when they had their lunch, they would all cut the crust off the bread. And like the guy I worked for, he would throw it on the ground, So never handed it to me. And sometimes you'd find a piece of crust in cement dust, it was like finding a treasure. Somehow, as the Americans were really nearing, it was almost the end of the war, they marched us all to the main camp of Dachau. And we spent the night in the camp in Dachau, and next morning and had to assemble again and march. My father was left with the sick and dying. He couldn't walk anymore. My brother and I were on this march. And they would, of course there were guards, and in the back of the column, anybody that dropped out would be shot. And my brother, as I said, was 12 years older than I was, but I was bossy. I really kind of took over, even while we were in the ghetto, kind of take care of my family, to find food. So he was ready to give up, and he couldn't walk, and I dragged him. I said, because in the back they would just shoot you. And we were on this march, I think, for about 4 or 5 days. And they marched us at night, and during the day they would find a place like a wooded area where we would rest, I guess, stay out of the public view. And I remember it was May 5th. By the way, the war ended May 8th. May 5th, we woke up in the morning, or evening, whichever was our schedule. And all we had, by the way, when we were in the camp, we had one blanket. We slept underground. So we woke up, and I remember there was probably at least 2 feet of snow on top of our blankets. This was in May in the Bavarian mountains. And we looked around, the guards were gone. That's how we were liberated. And, we saw American soldiers, and they tried, people scrambling for food, and the soldiers would give prisoners, whatever they had, their rations and chocolate. And quite a few prisoners actually died because there was just food that they couldn't digest. We were way up in the Bavarian Alps, as I said, and we were put in, there was an abandoned SS cadet school, and we had prisoners just roaming around there. I don't think they even were ready to feed us or anything. Somehow you just roamed around a little village. I remember there was a dead horse on the ground, and some of the prisoners ran to trying to get the meat, and several died of the contaminated meat. Again, as I said, I was bossy. I told my brother, let's not do that. We roamed around this little village. We knocked on the door of a little house, and there was an elderly German couple. They took us in. First thing they did is took our uniforms and burned it, because I think they probably walked by themselves with lice. When you figure that almost a year didn't have a bath or anything. I think, and this is the first time that we had a bath, and we slept in a bed, and we had some food in us. We were there maybe just a few days, maybe a week, when the American Army took us all and took us to Munich. And in Munich, there was an abandoned German army camp where they housed us all. And this was, I think, only Jewish prisoners there from all over. And we got clothing, we got food. It was just the people roamed around trying to just get organized and stuff. A friend of mine and I said, let's go out and see what's happening on the outside world. So we found an American Army company, trucking company, and I asked them for a job. And they gave us a job in the kitchen. And, we got food and clothing. And my main reason was I wanted to learn English. By the way, my education stopped at 8th grade when the war started. But I had 2 years of English. I don't think I knew much, but I guess it was the foundation that helped. And after a couple of months, I could converse in English. What I didn't know that I learned GI English. So, what I also, my father's entire family, his father had 3 brothers and 2 sisters living in the States. He was the only one that was in Europe because my mother didn't want to leave her parents, which is another story. The Russians sent him to Siberia where he died. So we see when the old memory goes. where was it?
Siberia.
Oh, yeah, my grandfather died in Siberia. Anyway, so we worked for the Army, and as I said, my father's family were all in the States. So my brother remembered the address of one of my aunts. So, I asked one of the soldiers to send a letter for us. So we established contact with our family in the States. After about 3 months or so of working for the Army, I was asked to come back to the camp to translate, because, we had people from all over Europe. In those days, I spoke 7 languages. Now I have trouble with one. And I worked there as a translator for a few months. But as I said, even there, I lived outside. And I know I didn't have any money, but I guess I had plenty of food. They used to throw away more food, that I rented a room and we lived outside the camp. Then I was contacted by the American consulate and asked if I would come to work there as a translator. I don't know how they found me. And so I worked there for, again, probably 3 months. And we were processing people that were ready to go to States. So when the first boat left, I told the consul that I'd like to go. I mean, we had contact already with families, so we established that. And they tried to tell me, what's your rush? Stay here, we'll give you a job. I was 18 years old. I said, I have to go to school. My school stopped at 8th grade. So my brother and I left on the second boat that left, Germany for the United States. And my father wouldn't leave. He wanted to stay back, maybe establish contact, find out what happened to my mother and my sister. Well, after a couple of years, he gave up, and he joined us in the States. When we came to the States, I lived with my brother and I both lived with one of my aunts. And the first thing I did is I got a job after a few weeks of visiting, and I started night school. In those days they had, because there were so many of the soldiers that quit high school when they joined the Army when the war started. So they had a program where you would take, GED. So it took a year, and I got a high school diploma. And then I went on to college, and I worked. And after, I don't know, anyway, after a year or so, I was invited to a New Year's party. You got to be careful with her. Anyway, I was invited to a New Year's party, and the girls were all high school seniors, and the boys, some were already first year college. Anyway, I was invited there, and I roamed around the apartment, and I saw a little girl under a table, kind of crawling under a table. And I asked her, what's your problem? She said, I lost an earring, and they're so dear. My father gave it to me. It's so important. So I said, well, if I find it, I'll get a kiss. Well, guess what? I got my kiss. And I found out, of course, later, she couldn't see a thing without her glasses. Anyway, so as I said, all the girls were like seniors. So I asked her, what year are you in? And she said, second. I got her phone number, and I told my friend I met a girl. She's probably 14 years old, but I'm going to ask her out. Well, turns out she was second year University of Chicago.
Oh.
She graduated high school in 2 years and college in 2 years. Never learned how to spell. So when I tell the story, Mimi says, what about me? I'm almost ready. So anyway, we lied about our age, we got married, and then of course we told her parents, and we got married for real. And my father-in-law and I started a small business in making laminate. In fact, every school I go to, sometimes I find staples I made. It was he was running the business and I was running the plant. Don't ask me how fast I learned, but I was good at manufacturing. Unfortunately, a couple of years he died at a very young age, so here I was, maybe 25. Now I had to do the buying and selling and everything. But I managed, and business grew. And most of my business were kind of customers making furniture, and the furniture industry was moving south. So I had some customers that said, y'all come down here, we'll give you the business. Well, I went to Morristown, and I did start a little plant there. Some of them gave me the business, some of them didn't. And I figured I'll set it up and go on my way. Well, I bought this old building from somebody, and he says, do you want to, it was a furniture factory there, but would you like to hire my superintendent? And I said, sure, I need somebody. Well, I would leave on Friday, I'd leave him notes, what to do, because I usually would come in, still had a business in Chicago. So I usually go Monday night, leave for Knoxville, sometimes Thursday, sometimes Friday, back to Chicago. So, I spent a lot of time. Not only that, I found out after a couple of weeks the guy couldn't write. But he was smart. He hired a young man to do the reading for him. Well, the business grew, but would you believe that for 14 years, every week, Chicago to Knoxville. And so it's finally, after I think 1977, finally decided I had enough and moved to Knoxville. By then I sold the Chicago plant. In the meantime, we raised a family. I don't know, my wife wanted 6 children. And we finally negotiated down to 3, but we have 4